Sarah stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping her hair around her face. Below her, the waves crashed against the rocks with a relentless fury, mirroring the turmoil in her own heart. She raised her arms to the sky, as if searching for answers in the vast expanse of the universe. The weight of her decisions pressed down on her, threatening to consume her whole. She had come here seeking solace, seeking a sign that she was on the right path. But all she found was uncertainty. Tears blurred her vision as she remembered the words that had driven her to this moment. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the shattered dreams. How had everything gone so wrong? How had she ended up here, standing alone on a cliff's edge, with nothing but the roar of the ocean to keep her company? But somewhere deep inside her, a spark flickered to life. A tiny voice whispered that this was not the end, that she was stronger than she knew. With a deep breath, she stepped back from the edge, the resolve hardening in her heart. She would not be defeated. She would fight, she would rise, and she would find a way to rewrite her story. The storm raging inside her matched the storm brewing outside, but she stood tall, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty street, Ava found herself standing in front of the old Victorian house. It loomed in the fading light, its windows dark and foreboding. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. With trembling hands, she pushed open the rusted gate and made her way up the cracked path to the front door. The wood creaked in protest as she turned the handle and stepped inside. The air was musty and thick, filled with the scent of neglect and decay. Ava hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she shouldn't be here, knew the risks of delving into the secrets of the past. But she couldn't resist the pull, the need to uncover the truth that had haunted her for so long. She made her way through the empty rooms, each one filled with echoes of a life long gone. Dust motes danced in the dim light, swirling around her like ghosts of the past. She came to a stop in front of a closed door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. As the door swung open, a rush of memories flooded her mind. The room was frozen in time, a shrine to the past. Faded photographs lined the walls, faces smiling up at her from decades ago. A sense of recognition washed over her, a feeling of belonging in this forgotten place. And then she saw it, tucked away in the corner of the room. A worn, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. With trembling hands, she picked it up, her heart racing with anticipation. As she flipped through the pages, the words leaped out at her, written in a familiar hand. The truth she had been searching for was laid bare before her, a tale of love and loss, of secrets kept and promises broken. Tears welled in her eyes as she read on, the weight of the past heavy on her shoulders. And in that moment, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Ava knew that her life would never be the same again. The secrets of the past had been unearthed, their power unleashed in a torrent of emotion and revelation. And as she closed the journal, a new chapter began, one filled with hope and heartache, with the promise of a future forged from the ashes of the past. As the storm raged on outside, Amelia found herself pacing back and forth in her living room, the weight of the truth heavy on her chest. How could she have been so blind to the deceptions that had surrounded her for so long? How could she have trusted someone who had ultimately betrayed her in the most unimaginable way? The memories flooded back, sharp and painful like shards of broken glass. The late-night whispers, the stolen glances, the hidden phone calls, all pieces of a puzzle she had refused to see. But now, faced with the truth, Amelia could no longer pretend that everything was fine. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, a fierce determination building within her. She would not let this betrayal break her. She would rise from the ashes of her shattered illusions and rebuild herself stronger than ever before. With a resolute nod, Amelia made a decision. She would confront the lies, unearth the secrets, and face the consequences head-on. No more hiding, no more pretending. The storm may be raging outside, but within her, a fire of determination burned bright. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the phone, her fingers trembling, yet firm. It was time to confront the one who had deceived her, the one who thought they could break her with their lies. But little did they know, Amelia was a force to be reckoned with, a storm in her own right. and she would not rest until justice was served and her heart was free from the chains of deceit. With tears streaming down her face, Amelia rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding with fear. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Bursting through the emergency room doors, she found herself face to face with the reality of the situation. Doctors and nurses were everywhere, frantically working to save the life of the man she loved. She stood frozen, watching the chaos unfold before her. Images of their shared memories flooded her mind. The first time they met, their first kiss, the countless adventures they had embarked on together. How could it all come crashing down in an instant? As the minutes ticked by like hours, a sense of helplessness washed over her. She prayed to a higher power, bargaining for his life, promising anything and everything if only he would pull through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor appeared before her, his expression grave. Her heart plummeted as she braced herself for the worst. But then, the doctor uttered those words that breathed new life into her shattered soul. "He's stabilized, but he's not out of the woods yet. We need to perform emergency surgery. Are you his family?" Amelia nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude and relief. She clung to any thread of hope, willing him to fight, to come back to her. As she paced the waiting room, thoughts of what their future could have been if he hadn't survived racked her mind. She realized in that moment just how much he meant to her, how empty her life would be without him in it. Hours passed before the doctor emerged once more, his face illuminated with a glimmer of hope. The surgery was successful, and he would recover in time. Amelia let out a sob of pure joy, thanking whatever forces had intervened on their behalf. When she finally saw him, weak and fragile but alive, she vowed to never take a moment with him for granted again. This ordeal had brought them closer, had shown her the depth of her love for him, and as he reached for her hand, his eyes filled with unspoken gratitude, she knew that they would weather any storm together, their love stronger than ever. She stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind tugging at her hair, and the crashing waves below calling to her. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the memories that haunted her, the choices she regretted. But as she took a step forward, ready to let go of it all, a voice called out to her from behind. "Stop!" The voice was familiar, warm, and filled with urgency. She couldn't place it at first, but then the pieces clicked into place, and she turned slowly to see him standing there, looking at her with eyes full of fear and love. He ran towards her, his footsteps loud against the wind, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Please, don't do this," he gasped out, reaching for her hand. She looked into his eyes, the storm raging around them mirroring the turmoil within her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "After everything I've done, after all the pain I've caused, why do you still care?" He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle yet firm. "Because I love you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I love you more than anything in this world, and I can't bear to lose you. Please, come back to me. We can face this together." Tears welled up in her eyes, mixing with the rain that drenched them both. She could see the truth in his eyes, the sincerity of his words piercing through the darkness that clouded her mind. In that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for her to make things right. She stepped back from the edge, away from the abyss that had beckoned her, and into his embrace. The storm still raged around them, but in his arms, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. They stood there, clinging to each other as the wind whipped around them, but for the first time in a while, she felt like maybe there was hope after all. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the sprawling city below, Emily found herself standing at the edge of the cliff, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind whipped through her hair, stinging her cheeks as tears streamed down her face. She held the letter tightly in her trembling hands, the words scrawled across the page like a dagger to her heart. "Dear Emily, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I need to find myself, figure out who I am without you. Please understand." The words echoed in her mind, a cruel reminder of the love she thought was eternal, now shattered like glass on the cold, hard ground. She had given him everything, her heart, her soul, her future, and now he was leaving her, walking away without a second glance. As she stood on the edge, 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. The pain was too much to bear, the betrayal too deep to forgive. She could feel the darkness creeping in, threatening to swallow her whole. But somewhere deep inside her, a spark of defiance flickered to life. With a sudden surge of determination, Emily crumpled up the letter and flung it into the wind. She wiped away her tears, squared her shoulders, and made a decision. She would not let this break her. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Taking a deep breath, she turned away from the cliff and began to walk back towards the city. The night was young, and she had a choice to make. She could let this ruin her, or she could rise from the ashes and become stronger than ever before. As she walked, the echoes of his words faded into the distance, replaced by a new mantra that pulsed through her veins like a heartbeat. I am enough. I am strong. I will survive. And with each step she took, Emily felt a flicker of hope ignite within her wounded heart. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with twists and turns she couldn't predict. But one thing was certain: she would face it head-on, with courage in her soul and fire in her eyes. As the rain poured down, Sarah's heart raced with apprehension. She clutched the letter in her hand, the words on it ringing in her ears like a haunting melody. "Meet me at the old bridge at midnight," it had read, signed by a name she had tried so hard to forget. With each step she took towards the bridge, the weight of her past mistakes pressed down on her shoulders like a burden too heavy to bear. Memories flooded her mind, the promises made, the dreams shared, and the betrayal that tore it all apart. The sound of her own footsteps echoed in the silence of the night, the only company she had as she approached the dimly lit bridge. A figure stood at the other end, shrouded in shadows, but she knew it was him. The man who held her heart in his hands and shattered it without remorse. As she drew closer, Sarah's eyes locked with his, the stormy gaze sending a shiver down her spine. Words stuck in her throat, her voice lost in the howling wind. But she didn't need words to convey the hurricane of emotions raging within her. The man took a step forward, his hand reaching out tentatively as if to bridge the gap between them. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight, torn between anger and longing. How could he show up now, after all this time, expecting her to forgive and forget? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw a flicker of vulnerability, a glimmer of regret that mirrored her own. And in that moment, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. The rain continued to fall, washing away the pain and anger that had festered for so long. Sarah took a shaky breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The past may have been filled with darkness and betrayal, but perhaps the light of forgiveness and second chances still had a chance to shine through. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the two figures standing on the cliff's edge, emotions ran high. Sarah's heart raced in her chest as she gazed into the intense eyes of the man she once thought she could never live without. Julian, his jaw clenched in determination, held Sarah's gaze, his hands trembling with the weight of the decision he was about to make. "Please, Julian," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with desperation. "Don't do this. We can work through this together. I love you." A heavy silence hung between them, punctuated only by the crashing of the waves against the rocks far below. Julian closed his eyes, his resolve wavering, but then he opened them again, steeling himself for what he knew needed to be done. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah," Julian finally spoke, his voice steady but laced with pain. "I can't keep living this lie. It's not fair to either of us." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, the reality of the moment hitting her with a force that almost knocked the air from her lungs. The man she had built her world around was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "You promised me forever, Julian," she choked out, her voice breaking. "You promised you'd never leave me." Julian reached out a hand to touch her cheek, his touch gentle, but his eyes betraying the turmoil within him. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we both deserve to be happy, and I know now that I can never be truly happy unless I follow my heart." With those words hanging in the air between them like a dagger, Julian took a step back, breaking the physical connection that had bound them together for so long. Sarah watched in silent agony as he turned away, his figure silhouetted against the dying light of the day. And then, with a single leap of faith, Julian plunged off the cliff and into the unknown depths below. The sound of his body hitting the water echoed in Sarah's ears, a final, chilling reminder of the choice he had made. Alone on the cliff, with tears streaming down her face, Sarah collapsed to her knees, her heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces. In that moment, her world crumbled around her, leaving nothing but the cold embrace of the cruel and unforgiving night. The showdown was inevitable. Julia stood face to face with the man who had haunted her dreams for years. His voice was cold and mocking, sending shivers down her spine. "You thought you could escape me, Julia? You thought you could just disappear and start a new life?" he sneered, his eyes burning with hatred. But Julia stood tall, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering. "I will not let you control me anymore. I am not the same frightened girl you used to prey upon," she declared, her voice steady despite the fear swirling inside her. The man's laughter echoed through the abandoned warehouse, the sound chilling her to the core. "You really think you can defeat me? You are nothing without me, Julia. I made you who you are," he hissed, stepping closer with a sinister smile. Julia's hands clenched into fists, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, I am not defined by you. I am defined by the choices I make, and I choose to be free of you. Once and for all," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. A tense silence filled the air as the two adversaries faced off, the weight of years of pain and torment hanging between them. And then, in a split second, everything changed. With a sudden surge of strength and fury, Julia lunged forward, delivering a swift and powerful punch to the man's jaw. He staggered back, shock written across his face as he realized that she was not the helpless victim he had once controlled. "You underestimated me, just like you always have," Julia whispered, her eyes flashing with a fierce triumph. And in that moment, Julia knew that she had finally broken free from the chains of her past. The man who had tormented her was now lying defeated at her feet, a mere shadow of the monster he had once been. As she walked away from the wreckage of their final confrontation, Julia felt a sense of peace settle over her soul. She was no longer the girl who had cowered in fear. She was a survivor, a warrior, a symbol of resilience and strength. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, a new chapter of her life unfolding before her, Julia knew that she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the unwavering belief in her own power and the knowledge that she was truly free. With tears streaming down her face, Emma braced herself for the final showdown. The wind whipped around her, carrying the echoes of her memories and the weight of her decisions. She stood at the edge of the cliff, facing the menacing figure of her nemesis, the one who had haunted her dreams and threatened everything she held dear. "I won't let you win," Emma's voice quivered, but her determination shone through. The dark figure chuckled, a chilling sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You cannot defeat me, Emma," the figure growled, its eyes blazing with malice. But Emma stood her ground, her heart pounding with a fierce resolve. "I may not have the strength or power that you do, but I have something you'll never understand," Emma declared, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. She raised her hand, and a burst of light erupted from within her, swirling around her like a protective shield. The dark figure hesitated for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing its face. Emma took advantage of the momentary weakness, charging forward with all the strength she could muster. The clash was fierce, a battle of wills and power that seemed to reverberate through the very fabric of the world. As the dust settled, Emma stood victorious, her foe defeated at last. But the victory came at a cost as she fell to her knees, exhausted and drained. The burden she had carried for so long lifted from her shoulders, leaving her feeling lighter than air. And in that moment of triumph and release, Emma realized that the true power lay not in her abilities or strength, but in the courage and love that burned within her heart. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Emma knew that she had found her true purpose and her true self. And she stood tall, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she was stronger than she had ever imagined.